I just wanted to start my presentation by talking about the idea of abolition. I started my journey thinking about carceral geographies, the idea of carcerality, and Ethnic Studies 21 AC is my very first Ethnic Studies class here at Cal. Victoria Robinson taught that class, and she introduced me to this quote, and it was, racism is the state-sanctioned and/or extra-legal production of and exploitation of group-differentiated vulnerability to premature death. Prison is a new iteration of this theme. And we played around with the idea of prisons and carcerality and the idea of what spaces of confinement were supposed to mean and what escaping or resisting those spaces was supposed to mean for people struggling to do the work of dismantling prisons, of dismantling the prison industrial complex. So through this class, we played around with the idea of prison abolition and abolition pedagogy as a framework to look into when trying to navigate these social justice spaces or these prison abolition spaces. And so moving forward, I really wanted to dig deeper into this quote by Ruthie Gilmore and think about what premature death looked like for people of color communities, what premature death looked like for people who weren't exactly navigating prison spaces, but were navigating these ideas of carcerality, these ideas of victimhood, these ideas of criminalization. So through those desires, I ended up taking Poli-Sci 167 and African American Studies 107, taught by Tae-Koo Lee. 167 was Race and Ethnic Politics in New Century America, and African American 107 is Race and Public Policy. Through both of those experiences in those classes, I read a lot of material that kind of underlined that public policy has generally been an encompassing failure for people of color communities in America. We talked a lot about what redlining has looked like, what access to healthcare has looked like, what public housing, food deserts have looked like for people of color historically in America, what immigration laws have looked like for people in communities trying to enter and opt into the idea of whiteness or immigration acceptability for this country. And all throughout these experiences, I crafted this understanding that the idea of criminalization, the idea of carcerality, is very much crafted before one enters prison spaces. The idea of not being accepted and the idea that one is better off excluded or shunned from society is very much placed onto a lot of people of color identities and consciousnesses before they're ever charged with an actual crime or ever put through the penal system. I took Tae-Koo Lee's class at a really interesting time. It was the fall of last year, 2014, during the non-indictment of Mike Brown and Eric Garner's killers, during the height of the Black Lives Matter moments. Sorry, I should be skipping through these slides. During the height of the Black Lives Matter movements that I had also been taking place in, and through these conversations, a lot of emotions were strumming up inside me, and that culminated in me going out and protesting in the streets, catching rubber bullets and tear gas. And so that entire semester was very interesting in terms of talking about criminalization, racialization for people of color, and so I felt like that all gave me a lot of insight as to what the idea of criminalization and carcerality looked like outside of prison spaces. At the same time, I was taking a class with Keith Feldman. I think he's one of the people who helped set up the idea of carceral geographies as a course thread. And I'm very grateful for Keith Feldman because I took a 190 AC class with him in ethnic studies about race, war, and culture. And what this did for me is radically change the idea of what contemporary carceral landscapes look like in America. So often when we think of carcerality, when we think of the prison industrial complex, we think of actual housing facilities, prisons, deportation centers. Contemporarily, the landscape of carcerality and criminality has changed so much post 9/11. Through this 190 AC class, I learned about the NSA data collection facilities. Through this class, I was able to do a bunch of research by infiltrating the local Berkeley Police Review Commission. This is a local governmental entity that was set up by Berkeley in the 80s, and basically they don't have an internal affairs commission in Berkeley. Post all the student protests that were going on in the 80s, the National Guard coming in beating protests, there were a lot of demands for a community oversight board to hold the police accountable. So I chose to assert myself as a student on this position on the board, and I learned about and was able to access a lot of documents, conversations, and information about our local politics and policing in connection to the greater understanding of national security or threats to the country. Through this, I learned that the city of Berkeley itself cooperates greatly with NSA and data collection facilities, as we now know thanks to the data leaks and information that we've shared through Edward Snowden and a lot of the efforts that Chelsea Manning has made to make this kind of information dissemination possible. I learned that the university and the city of Berkeley is very complicit in the militarization of the police through urban shield incentives, through the idea that if our police are doing well in training activities, that they are deserving of military gear, military funds, and federal incentives to do better quote-unquote policing for the incentive of quote-unquote national security. The closest NSA data collection center is NCRIC. It's Northern California Regional Information Center. It's in downtown San Francisco. They've admitted in many public Berkeley forums that they house the phone calls, emails, Skypes, texts, public information of everybody at this university. This is all leading into the landscape of criminality and basically a big brother oversight that the government is intruding into our personal lives for the idea of national security, the idea of national safety. Things like internet and web privacy or the lack thereof have been trunced because of the Patriot Act. Urban shield, police militarization again, has also created border militarization that have criminalized the idea of certain people of color identities. The idea of the quote-unquote terrorist or the quote-unquote illegal alien has been crafted as political rhetoric used to target and alienate people of color communities, often in lower income, often in immigrant spaces. And all of this cultivates the idea that certain bodies and certain people are punishable or should be punished before they even enter prison spaces. And so I'm really thankful for the opportunity to take Keith Feldman's 190 AC class, Race, War, and Culture, because I feel like that was a very eye-opening opportunity to, one, engage in research that felt like it had a lot of praxis in terms of social justice work, but two, gave a lot of context in terms of like the new age theory that are going around in terms of prison abolition and the fight for social justice. Locally, we see here at UC Berkeley that UCPD is one of the highest award-winning recipients of Urban Shield and federal militarization funds. UCPD and University of California Bomb Squad has ranked #1 and #2 in the last 3 or 4 Urban Shield games, and because of that, they've received millions and millions of dollars in police funding. Like UC Davis has a tank. Like we have water cannons on our like militarized vehicles here. There's just a lot, like every single UCPD car now has a shotgun and an automatic rifle in the front seat. Like there are a lot of like slow, obvious changes to our campus climate and our campus culture that shows that the idea of carcerality is not just for people who are involved in legal dilemmas or the prison spaces. So I wanted to continue with the idea of being denied rights. I read this great text by Lisa Cacho. She wrote this book called Social Death, the Criminalization of the Unprotected. And again, she really touched off that initial Ruthie Gilmore quote that I brought up in the beginning, where we talked about how, or the book talked about how incompatibility with American whiteness becomes the space of illegal or restricted existence, which automatically qualifies or means a lesser quality of life for people who are labeled with things like terrorist, illegal alien, security threat, criminal thug, violent, national security threat, etc. Ultimately, I ended my time working in the Berkeley Police Review Commission after the death of Kayla Moore. I think there was something about the local deaths of people around me in the Bay Area that I couldn't seem to stand, and there was something about learning about these things from a theoretical standpoint that didn't really sit well to me, so I just wanted to leave this slide up in remembrance of Mario Woods, Alex Nieto, Oscar Grant, Kayla Moore, and Al-Makar Perez, who have all been gunned down by SF or Oakland or Berkeley police departments. So finally, I just wanted to talk about my experiences in the last class I took to complete my tour of carceral geographies is with Victoria Robinson, her 190 AC class. And so how I wanted to wrap this up with is the idea that, you know, while spaces outside of prisons are overwhelmingly lethal for people of color, are overwhelmingly lethal for identities that are perceived as criminalized, on the inside, prisons are not looking any prettier. Recently, there's been this move and this direction towards prison reform as like this really sexy thing in social justice. You know, like everybody has a Michelle Alexander quote that they want to like quip off. Everybody has like, you know, their favorite statistic about how there are more jails than prison, there are more jails than schools in California, or something about the UC system and whatever it may be. But the understanding that the prison industrial complex is a space that should not be expanded and should be shrunk isn't really getting through contemporary political efforts. And so what I really appreciated was the ability to work with and meet Rachel Herzing through my experiences in this 190 class. Rachel Herzing is, I just wanted to make this quick plug, Rachel Herzing is one of the founders of Critical Resistance in Oakland. They're one of the most amazing organizations in Oakland doing work to fight urban shield, fight deportations, fight police militarization, and she said something when we had this conversation about prison expansion and the future of prison abolition, and we were talking about reforms, and this was in the wake of Prop 47, and I asked, you know, how do you feel about Prop 47? You know, we have all these people who are supposedly going to get out of jail on nonviolent crimes, but what do we do with the millions of people who are quote-unquote violent, the millions of people who are in death row, who are gang-affiliated, who are seen as terrorist threats? And she told me, she looked at me, she said, Oliver, I hate Prop 47. She said, we should not be building anything up that we will have to later tear down, given the autonomy to build our communities in light. And I thought this was one of the most beautiful quotes I had heard, because it just validated all my feelings about the contemporary movement for prison abolition. Currently, there's this steer towards this idea called carceral humanism, where contemporary quote-unquote progressives or progressive quote-unquote politicians are repackaging what carcerality and what victimhood looks like. There are these things called mental health jails, gender-responsive facilities, kiddie prisons, and there are these really sick places that are not packaged as federal facilities, but they are. You know, San Francisco right now is building a new jail. They're bulldozing a McDonald's to build this new jail, and they're sitting here going like, oh, this new jail is only going to be for women. This new jail will have all these OBGYN resources, will have our on-site, you know, people in case there are pregnant folks inside this jail, and women will just have the best amount of like resources and access to childcare while in prison. And you know, a lot of people are buying into this, like, yeah, this is great. We're finally going to treat women and transgender folks and mothers right. But why do they need to be locked up? You know, and this is like this shift of like, how are we repackaging and how are we rebranding carcerality and incarceration in ways that oppressed communities will find good? So that's just how I wanted to end my presentation. The outside is really shitty for people of color, but the inside ain't looking too pretty either. So I just wanted to have that in y'all's thoughts when we move forward and think about stopping the prison industrial complex. Thank you.
I'll really take a couple of questions from the audience. Questions? I had a question. I really like what you're saying at the end about carceral, this sort of carceral humanism movement. Because if you're coming from the perspective of the humanities, there are a lot of things that are labeled as humanistic or humanities that I think, as you correctly see, have seen through, don't really come with the kind of concerns and so forth that are born out of the humanities and humanistic movements. So thank you for pointing that out to everyone about the kind of rhetoric of these new kind of carceral projects that really is probably just the same old with a new kind of rhetoric around them. Can I ask you though about your work with the Police Review Commission and some of your other work? What's the next step for you in this? Is it more theoretical insofar as you're interested? You said you left with the Police Review Commission because there's kind of some sort of emptiness there, seeing the kind of stuff going on that you were saying. Do you plan on kind of combining your interest in kind of theoretical work on carcerality and a kind of activist mode, or how do you see yourself going?
Definitely, and I think that's really important. I think, especially here at UC Berkeley, we have access to and the ability to have these conversations in a way that's like very thoughtful and very self-gratifying. I think like Victoria Robinson, I'm going to steal this from Victoria Robinson, but at the end of the day she says like this is all intellectual masturbation. And so the idea for me is that prison work isn't something that I came to UC Berkeley to write about. You know, like the reason for me doing prison abolition and prison justice work is because I know that very well I could be in a position where I could be locked away for a very long time. There are people I know who are locked away for a very long time. So the idea for me is that where can I find the ability to do the most radical thinking I can while being able to make that praxis happen? And so for me, I found and cultivated relationships amongst what I think are very valuable and valid organizations amongst the Bay. I'm from the Bay Area and just from San Francisco. So the Bay Area is where I see like a lot of my efforts being rooted. And so I went out of my way and sought out organizations that I feel like have a lot of merit. Critical Resistance, as I mentioned, was one of them. There's another one called CURB, Californians United for a Responsible Budget. I think they're also an amazing organization. Justice Now, they're an amazing prison abolitionist organization. I think that there are very, very key organizations who are doing amazing work right now, fighting urban shield, fighting deportations, fighting mass incarceration, actually closing jails. You know, Critical Resistance and Rachel Herzing, they closed a deportation center in Santa Cruz. That's a huge win. You know, like they've closed deportation centers and jails all throughout Santa Barbara. And those are tangible steps. You know, if you say you want to fight mass incarceration, closing a jail is a really big tangible step in fighting mass incarceration. You know, and also, you know, there are people who are trying to build more jails. So it's like getting involved in those local efforts, like finding out which of these local sheriffs are trying to expand the carceral facilities in any way, shape, or form that they're trying to. And for me, you know, like a lot of that is remaining in the local. You know, there's a lot more I could be doing, but I feel like San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, the Bay Area is where I feel like I can do the most impact right now.
So first of all, great presentation. You hit on a lot of important things. So I work in government, and I know part of closing prisons and stuff is finding alternatives. So I was wondering if you had in your time studying to this thread, examining alternatives to prison and how we can help rehabilitate criminals and things like that.
That's an awesome question. I'm writing my thesis about this right now. There are a lot of, right now in California, there's this great desire to lower the prison population. I think since 2010, Governor Brown, when Governor Brown came in as governor, like the prison population was at 155% capacity. I think he was mandated by last year to reduce it to like 133, and it's only at 140, right? And so there's just like a huge incentive in California politics to like, how do we get that number down? Like, how the hell do we get that number down? And there have been a lot of like really, really shady ways they've gotten the number down, right? Like in Santa Cruz, what they're doing is they're letting a lot of quote-unquote nonviolent offenders go, so that they're saying their beds are empty, but they're filling those beds with quote-unquote illegal immigrants, right? So those people are still generating money for the county, but they don't have to be counted as federal inmates because they're not technically citizens, right? So there's a lot of shady ways where they're reducing that number, right? But there are also a lot of great ways where they're reducing this number. There's an organization I know of, started in Brooklyn and New York, but it just launched a campaign over here in San Francisco last year. It's called the Reset Foundation. I don't know if you've heard of them. They won $250,000 from Google in their social justice campaign just recently. I'm in close communication with the founder of this project, and what they do is they take 15 to 25-year-old males who are sentenced to nonviolent, mostly drug crimes. So they'd be getting locked up from anywhere to 5 to 25 years. Instead of sending them to San Quentin, instead of sending them to Pelican Bay, instead of sending them to one of the 6 San Francisco County Sheriff Department jails, they go to this, what they call a school they built in Muir Woods, which is in north of San Francisco. It's a foresty area in the Bay Area. And they built this school. It's legit a school. They house 75 people there, and who are staying there for 5 to 15 years. They don't call them inmates, they call them students, and it's like an alternative restorative justice program, right? And you know, there are a lot of, you could get into the politics of that. Well, like, why only nonviolent folks? Why only people of color? Why only like 5 to 15 years? You know, there's a lot of like arguments you can talk to about that, but that's like actively getting the number down. You know, it's like no 15 to 25-year-olds from San Francisco County are going to jail, they're going to this program. You know, where they're not getting locked up, they're not being booked and processed, they don't have to go through that painstaking process of like being naked and like, you know, I don't know if any of y'all have ever been formerly incarcerated, but that's just like it's an invasive process, you know, like getting all your DNA information taken from you is a very invasive process. So removing that, you know, it's not actively dropping the number as much as we'd like, but it's dropping the number. So that's one way that I support reducing the prison population. There are other ways too. There's like ankle monitors, and ankle monitors used to be like the forefront conversation topic of like prison reform. It was like, oh, just put an ankle monitor on everybody, like let them loose. But people don't understand, like ankle monitors are expensive. Like you have to pay for ankle monitors yourself if you're self-incarcerated. So that's not feasible for a lot of us. But yeah, thank you for that question.
Well, that's time now, but thank you.